Okay, guys, we're going to give this a shot. Thanks for being flexible. I'm in my office. My lighting makes me look jaundiced, but I think I'm healthy. So we're going to go over chapters 5 and 6 today. Remember that in order to get your participation points, you need to do the discussion board that I've also put on Blackboard for you. And we're going to go over the language sample assignment at some point, so you might want to have that Blackboard opened on your computer so you can look at that when I'm referring to it. Yeah, and so let's jump in. Okay, so I should also mention I'm doing this on Microsoft Stream, and so I can only record about 15 minutes at a time. So I'll just list them one after the other. It should be pretty easy to get through all of it. But of course, your chapter goals I have listed for you here on your PowerPoint. And we're going to jump into language development, and we're going to focus first on early childhood, so birth to preschool years. So here's some key terms, because this would be chapter 5, so I have them divided. We're going to go into the ones, many of these that are listed here. Let's look first here at pre-linguistic development. So this is, at the very beginning. As you see, that first stage is 0 to 8 weeks, and we don't always think of infants as having language, but they are learning, and even their sounds mean something, and we can do observation-based assessment based on if they're doing some of these things in those earliest weeks. So things like reflexive crying, just being able to discriminate between sounds, their use of eye contact and body movement, going all the way to 18 months at the very end there, when we would be expecting full words and at least 1 word to 2 word utterances. So I'm not going to ever quiz you on, stage 3 or something. It might be one quiz question, but that's not really what I want you to focus on in this chapter. I just wanted to show you and point out that a lot happens between 0 to 18 months that we're looking at when it comes to language and linguistic development. The other thing I wanted to point out was that this idea from last week again, that joint attention is so important, and we want to see joint attention pretty much from the very beginning, like with eye contact from 0 to 8 weeks. And then let's jump to preschool years, which is where many of you probably are more familiar with. So the preschool years, that's when we start talking about MLUs. And MLU stands for mean length of an utterance. That's what you're looking at when you're doing the language sample. And so again, I'm not going to get too stuck that you know what happens in each stage. But if you look at these stages, just a general rule of thumb, it's very broad. But as a speech pathologist, if someone asked me what was typical or just to listen to their child, I would say whatever their age is in years, they should be having at least that many words in an utterance. So if I'm looking at a friend's daughter who says ball and and wants the ball and she's 1, that's fine. If I'm looking at that same child and they're 4 and they just say ball and they don't say ball please or big ball please, just longer utterances, then I might be concerned. So just overall, when you're working with preschoolers, let's say you're working with 3 to 4 to 5-year-olds, they should be using about as many words as their years, and that only goes until about age 5. Here it's broken up even more specifically, 2.5 to 3, but and even by months it's kind of broken up more specifically, but just the general rule is however old they are, they should at least be using that many words in an utterance. Okay, so if we were together, we'd be doing this discussion, but we're not, just in our hearts. So I'm going to kind of answer these questions for you. How does the concept of MLU help us understand language development? We have found now through time that their utterance length is a better indicator of how their language is developing, even like down to their grammatical development, than the child's age itself. So again, we kind of want them to correlate, but we can't just look at a child and know where they are on their development by their age, because some kids aren't, appropriate. Like that child, if they were using one word and they're 4, we can't start with what they're doing at 4. We need to start with they're only using one word, if that makes sense. So just like many things in the SPED world, there's chronological age, and then there's mental age or developmental age. And so we're going to use that, and that's how we use MLUs when we're looking at language. And then one of the reasons I want you to do this is because when you are in eligibility meetings, if you're on an evaluation team, when you're working, you're going to most likely sit in on evaluations where language is involved. And in the state of Missouri, one of the things that we are required to do is provide a language sample. So there's different eligibility requirements for different areas, but for a language disorder, whether it's the primary disorder or a secondary related disorder, you have to get standard deviation of a certain amount, 1.75 standard deviations below the mean on 2 comprehensive language tests, meaning a test that looks at both their expressive and receptive language. And then that also, you see that second line there, the eval report has to include language sampling, observations, as well as those curriculum-based assessment and some teacher and parent interviews or checklists. So there's a good chance that you will either be talking to a speech therapist about a language sample, or you'll be sitting in the meeting and that will come up. And so I think it's a good practice, for several reasons, but this is something that is used and you will see when you're working, when you're teaching. And if you hear that little buzz, it's because I have a little space heater at my feet because it is super cold in my office. Okay, we're going to go now and we're going to look at language sample and the analysis assignment. So the first instruction here is that you have to take a 50 utterance language sample. You can use a child observation. You can just watch your favorite TV show and record one person's lines because you're just looking at one person. So you could be watching The Big Bang Theory, and every time Sheldon's speaking, you could be writing out his utterances. You could have a conversation with a friend, your roommate, your parent, and just record their utterances and do the work off of that. So obviously, we're going to do this with children, but I understand, especially in COVID and other things you have on your plate, I'm not expecting it to be with a child by any means. But let's get into why I keep saying utterances and not sentences, because sentences and utterances are 2 different things. An utterance can be as simple as one word, like If you said something and then the child just said and stopped talking, and then you had to prompt them and you asked them again, that would count as an utterance. So when I'm looking at these and I'm grading these, you guys, I'm not going to be very harsh on the grading. It's really more of, were you at least close and did you at least actually try? That's what I'm going to be looking for more than anything else. But there is a difference between what qualifies as an utterance and what qualifies as a sentence. Then once you have 50 utterances, so that's not 50 words or 50 sentences, 50 utterances, 50 times somebody said something, you're going to take that and you're going to add up all the morphemes. Now, morphemes are different than words, if you'll remember. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. So a morpheme can be the S ending. So if someone said table, that would be 1 morpheme. If someone said tables, that would be 2 morphemes. Things like compound words like baseball, that's still 1 word because they're not using base and ball as separate meanings. So compound words don't count toward that. But really, when you're looking at any kind of like verb endings or possessive endings, so if somebody say, I jump, that would be 2, I jump. But if somebody said, I jumped, which is more grammatically correct, that would be 3, I jump, and the ED ending would be the 3rd morpheme. if we were together, we would practice some of these. And so by all means, if we get together next week on, around the 18th of February and you guys are completely confused, let's practice them in class. Just let me know. Or you can email me, you can arrange a time to meet with me in my office, you can call me. I don't want this to be overly complicated, and I don't want you to be worried about it by any means. Because again, even if you get it wrong, I will be able to tell if you at least watch this and we're trying to understand the assignment, and that's what I care about. And then the last part of it is you take a language sample and you get that mean length of utterance to tell us where you are language development wise. But then we also typically take those samples and kind of compare them to this checklist, if you will, to see what else we can gather about where their language is at. And I'm going to just skip ahead in our slides here. Here is an example, and I put this online, of where you can put each utterance, so sentence, look at me, utterance, 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 as you go down, and you need at least 50. And I've also included on here the way that you're going to actually get to that, because once you count all the morphemes, you have to divide them by the number of utterances, which that's why 50 is a nice number. We'll give you a nice percentage. So the total number of morphemes over the total number of utterances, that will get you your MLU at the end. So there's a spot, let me go back here. There's a spot on this speech language sample, and you can use a piece of notebook paper, but at the top you see you have to put the MLU. So there's a box in your book, and that's just what I copied and put on this PowerPoint of how you get to it. That's the total number of morphemes divided by the number of utterances. So it should be however many morphemes you get divided by 50, and that will give you a number. The last thing is an analysis worksheet like I was talking about. So you can see on here things like grammar, compound sentences, complex sentences, use negatives. If you don't know all those mean, I'm not too hung up on it, but I do think you should be able to look at it and say, did they ever use a WH question in any of the utterances? Did they ever, use plurals or possessives? Did they ever tell a story, a personal narrative? Did I notice joint attention and their tone of voice, some of those things under pragmatics and semantics? I mean, things that just jump out at you that I think without having to go in depth into some kind of language course. I want you to just try and see what all you can identify that they know just from that utterance sampling. Typically, if I'm evaluating language, I don't just base everything off of that sample, because hopefully I've done some more observation, but I definitely look at that sample because it can hold a lot of information beyond just what their mean length of utterance is. So again, I just want to give you exposure to this process. I do not expect perfection, and I don't want you to be obsessed with your grade correlating if you get anything right or wrong. I just want you to complete it and complete it to the best of your ability, and you'll be great.